MSU is about to embark on a celebration called the Year of Global Africa. We thought it fitting that we invite a researcher with related expertise, and we're very happy that Professor Walter Hawthorne could join us today. Walter Hawthorne is Professor of African History and Chair of the History Department at MSU. His areas of research specialization are African slavery and the slave trade. His first book, Planting Rice and Harvesting Slaves, Transformations Along the Guinea-Bissau Coast, 1400 to 1900, explores the impact of interactions with the Atlantic, and particularly slave trading, on small-scale, decentralized societies in Africa. His most recent book, From Africa to Brazil, Culture, Identity, and Atlantic Slave Trade, 1600 to 1830, examines the slave trade from West Africa to Amazonia, Brazil. Hawthorne is also a digital historian who has received funding from the National Endowment of Humanities for web-based projects, including Slave Biographies, which is at www.slavebiographies.org, which points an important spotlight on lives that really would have been just lost to history. These are fragments of biographies about the lives of actual slaves, and so I think it's an important resource online. It should also be noted that the PhD program in African history at MSU was recently ranked #1 by U.S. News and World Report. So congratulations to Dr. Hawthorne and his colleagues on that recognition.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here, and I do want to wish everybody a happy Year of Global Africa. That, of course, will kick off at the Penn State football game next week, when there will be a fantastic halftime show. So I hope to see you all there. Now, why are we celebrating the Year of Global Africa? We're celebrating the Year of Global Africa because, of course, MSU has long been engaged in productive partnerships with African institutions. In the history department, this stretches back to the 1960s, when MSU hired what was then one of the first Africanist historians in the country. And as Steve says, right now, MSU history, it was declared this year by U.S. News and World Report, is recognized as #1 in this field. A couple of other things about the history department. We also have an excellent program in African American history with some outstanding scholars, and we are as well excellent in digital history, in partnership really with MSU's Matrix, which is, of course, our Digital Humanities and Social Science Center. Now, my own research, which is in partnership, as it turns out, with Matrix, with our African Americanist scholars, and with other Africanist scholars here at MSU and at other institutions, centers on documents very much like this. This is a slave registry. This is actually a baptismal record from Cuba. And it is a baptismal record. When slave ships would arrive in Cuba, they would be baptized, and priests would write down information about them. There also exists in Cuba and Brazil and other parts stretching really around the Atlantic similar documents like this for marriages, plantation inventories, and many, many other records. Now, what is interesting about this, as Steve mentioned, is each one of these entries contains fragmentary information about one individual enslaved African. And that information often mentions the ethnicity of the person, the age of the person, the marriage partner, children, skills, all sorts of things. Sometimes even the place in Africa where this person hailed, from which this person hailed. Now, you can notice something about this document. This one's actually in pretty good shape. It's in very bad condition. So what do you do as a historian if you encounter a document like this? Well, one thing you can do, and I've been involved with Matrix and projects like this, is you can seek money from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the British Library, other organizations to preserve these documents. And this is an image of Matrix, and I was on this project. We're in the Gambia actually carrying out a preservation project. So preserving documents for future generations is important. What else can you do with those? Well, you can take those documents and put them online so they're available to the public. But they're, as you saw, very difficult to read, very difficult to analyze. So perhaps a third thing you could do was to extract data from those, enter it into a database, and run statistical analyses. And indeed, much of our work centers on that, running statistical analyses of these things to figure out how many Africans from particular ethnic groups were enslaved. What were the gender ratios? What was the average age of people who were enslaved? When enslaved Africans reached the New World, what were their choices about marriage partners? These sorts of questions. Then, of course, you can take that information itself, this data-based information, and put it online. And this is a project that Steve mentioned, Slave Biographies, that was funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities that we carried out here at Michigan State University. It is, in effect, an elaborate database. It allows you to run statistical analyses and, importantly for the public, to carry out genealogical research. So you can actually use this thing to go through and look for individuals. So those are projects that we've done in history and done at Matrix, and now I want to talk to you about the next frontier, which the Mellon Foundation has provided us some preliminary funding for, and we're seeking further funding from the Mellon Foundation to carry out. That project is based on something called linked open data. The project that I just showed you is elaborate. It's here at MSU. It is growing daily as people contribute more and more data to it, but there are dozens of other projects like that around the country and around the world. And the issue we run into is really, what do you do if you want to link the data in these? What do you want to do if you want to find one individual in our data set, but also in other data sets, so you can see what happened to that individual in different places? What do you want to do if you want to run statistical analyses of larger data sets? Well, what we have proposed to the Mellon Foundation is a project involving linked open data, where we will actually go out and plug into these multiple other databases that exist and allow users of our hub here at Michigan State University to, again, search these other databases. And if I can do an analogy, it's kind of like what you might do for an airline ticket or a hotel room when you go on Expedia. You're searching across multiple databases. So what have we done? We have created, this is a wireframe. The Slave Biographies website exists. This one is still in development. We've created a wireframe, a mock-up for a project called Enslaved. This would be possibly the front page, and this would allow you then to search for individuals, to run statistical analyses about where people came from in Africa, where they ended up in the Americas. So you might then go to that first page and enter the name of an individual. That individual then, you would get accounts for the same name that pops up in various places. So you could do further investigation to see if you could find that individual in multiple places. In other words, trace that individual's flow, this enslaved individual, across the Atlantic. We also have beginning to develop on this website histories, stories about individual slaves, biographies of what their lives were like in enslavement. This is a terrific K-12 teaching tool, also a tool that can be used in college classrooms. And I think it is these stories that are very compelling to the public. Third, we're going to have, again, the ability to run statistical analyses. That could be done in a table, that could be done in a chart, and that could also be done on maps. So you could actually map with this function how many enslaved individuals came from particular parts of Africa, where they ended up in the Americas, and use this to sort of visualize the slave trade with a timeline at the bottom. Finally, my last slide, I want to mention this. Our work in history involves this and many other digital humanities projects. Now, when you think of folks like me, historians, you think about writing a book. Think about somebody as an individual sitting in a room and sitting at a computer and writing. This is a very new approach to historical studies in that it involves a team of people. I'm actually working actively with project managers and programmers. And we are creating projects that aren't in book form, but they show up on the internet. That is good for scholars. It's also, again, good for the public. It's good for the public that wants to do genealogical work, wants to find out something about the slave trade, good for K-12 education. It also can lead then to, we draw our own conclusions, but scholars can use the data that we have to draw other conclusions. So the question then is, if we're changing our approach to historical studies, are we taking that to the classroom? And the answer is yes. This is actually a lab that exists in Old Horticulture Hall, the home of the history department, and I want to thank the provost providing seed money for this. This is a lab called LEADER, the Lab for Education and Advancement of Digital Research. This is where we are teaching historians, these coming historians, our undergraduates and graduate students, to engage in this approach to historical studies. So they are still, of course, in the classroom writing essays and doing the work that they've always done as historians, but we've added this onto it. And this is a beautiful lab. We've got lots of high-tech equipment, and we're teaching students to do two things. One, how do you do research in the digital age? How do you actually go out on the internet and conduct meaningful research? And two, how do you publish that research in the digital age? How do you do something more than just write an essay? How do you create a website, our undergraduates, a website that would be available for the public to access and draw conclusions from? So that's a taste of the work that's going on in the history department. I thank you for having me, and I'm happy to take questions.